The next presenter is Miss Edirisinghe. She will be speaking to you all on corporate governance of banks, a critical analysis of Sri Lankan law and practice. This is an area which I really love, and I hope that she will do the justice to the topic. Thank you.
And distinguished gathering. Fortunately or unfortunately, we have lived to witness one of the greatest downfalls of the economy in 2007, which started in United States of America and which spread throughout the global economy like a bad virus, crippling the entire global economy. Interestingly, the root cause for the entire crisis lies with the irresponsible lending by the banking institutions and with the unexpected fall apart of the leading banks in United States of America, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, and Bear Stearns. After 8 years, we have not fully addressed the issue of failures of corporate governance of banks, particularly in the emerging economies. Therefore, let me start my research on the corporate governance of banks in Sri Lanka. This is the outline of my presentation. Banks play one of the most significant and essential roles in economy. The soundness of the banking system and the fineness of the economy go hand in hand. Therefore, the corporate governance of banks are of immense importance to any economy, and the failure of banks can have adverse spillover effects not only on the stakeholders of the bank, but also on every stakeholder in the entire economy. In Sri Lanka, the corporate governance reforms have been taken place since 1990s, adopting the Anglo-American structure of corporate governance. Notwithstanding the reforms, several banks fell in early 2000, Pramukha Savings and Development Bank and the Ceylon Bank. This shows that even though we have reforms, amendments, we have a failure, we have a weak point in the implementation or in the system of the corporate governance in Sri Lanka with regard to the banks. Let me tell you the objectives of my research. The aim of this research is to evaluate the system of corporate governance in Sri Lanka as applicable to the banking sector in the light of the recent banking scandals. In particular, the research is subjected to canvass opinions as to the effectiveness of the existing corporate governance mechanism relating to the banks, and analyze whether the failures in corporate governance has contributed to the failures of the banks that I said earlier, Ceylon Bank and Pramukha Savings and Development Bank, and to draw conclusions whether the existing system of corporate governance in Sri Lanka is satisfactory or in need of amendment, and ultimately to propose amendment if necessary. When I'm talking about the methodology, I must say that I used the qualitative method to do my research. Basically, I relied upon the primary and secondary sources, primary sources being the relevant acts, codes, regulations, and international instruments. Secondary sources being books, internet articles, and other findings, theses by other authors. Further, semi-structured interviews were used to have direct interactions with the authorities, institutions identified as the key actors of the banking sector, of the corporate governance relating to the banking sector in Sri Lanka. Moving to the analysis, I'll start my analysis with a quotation by Schleifer and Vishny, who did a great research on the corporate governance of banks in emerging economies. According to them, the corporate governance deals with the ways in which suppliers to finance to corporations assure themselves a getting return on their investment. Corporate governance has been defined by various authors, various institutions in various manners. According to Justice Owen, corporate governance is the framework of rules, relationships, systems and processes within and by which the authority is exercised and controlled in corporations. According to Sir Adrian Cadbury, corporate governance is concerned with holding the balance between economic and social goals, between individual and communal goals. Now let me explain about the importance of corporate governance to the banking sector. Corporate governance is important to any sector in the economy, but it is particularly important to the banking sector due to the important characteristics, significant characteristics in the banking sector. The first one is the bank's equity is relatively small when compared to the liabilities. The bank's liabilities are greater and the equity is small. Therefore, the bank shall be keen to strike a balance between the interest of its depositors and the lenders. Secondly, the business of banks is highly dependent on the public faith. If this public faith is lost, then the depositors will run to the bank asking for their deposits back. Then the bank will have to go for a crisis, a scandal. Thirdly, the bank raises its funds not through the shareholders like a normal corporation, like a normal corporate entity, but through the deposits of the depositors. Therefore, they have this special fiduciary duty towards the depositors to return their funds whenever demanded by the depositors. Fourthly, the lending by the banks is usually financed by the depositors, as I said earlier. This induces the banks to take unnecessary risks and to lend without having a proper mechanism to mitigate this risk. Fifthly, the failures of the banks can have systemic failure in the entire economy because the banks are connected with each and every component of the economy. Finally, the commercial banks play a very significant role in the economy because the commercial banks participate in the creation of money in the economy. This affects the money supply in the economy, affecting each and every economic indicator of the economy, including the gross domestic product, inflation, balance of payment, and everything. Now let me explain you about the legal framework pertaining to corporate governance of banks. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka performs as the corporate watchdog of the banking sector. In discharging its functions, the CBSL in Sri Lanka license new commercial and specialized bank, issue prudential directions, determinations, orders and guidelines to the banks. Thirdly, conduct continuous supervision and examination of banks. And finally, enforce regulatory actions and the resolutions of weak banks. Since 2009, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has adopted the Basel Committee standards, making the Sri Lankan standards in line with the international standards. In 2015, the Central Bank adopted Basel Committee 3 standards, ensuring that the Sri Lankan standards develops and evolves with the timely international standards. Apart from that, the Banking Act, the Monetary Law Act includes certain provisions with regard to the corporate governance of banks, and also the Accounting and Auditing Standards Act requires the banks to comply with the accounting and auditing standards introduced by the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Sri Lanka time to time. Apart from this, the Companies Act number 7 of 2007 ensures that the directors will comply with the duties they have towards the stakeholders, and the stakeholders, the shareholders, whether they are minority or majority, will be protected. Now I'll explain about the two banking scandals in Sri Lanka. The first one is the Pramuka Savings and Development Bank. I think you all know about this scandal which causes grave repercussions to the depositors in Pramuka Savings and Development Bank. Pramuka Savings and Development Bank, or PSDB, started in 1997 as a licensed specialized bank. Even though Central Bank allowed PSDB to start, they had no proper regulatory mechanism at that time to govern a private licensed specialized bank. The bank lent to the customers, but they had no priority execution rights. So what happened when the borrowers defaulted payments? They had no mechanism to recover their funds. The central bank intervened at this point and asked the bank to wind up, but it didn't think about the grave repercussions, the bad impacts that can be occurred on the depositors of that bank. Second scandal is the Ceylon Bank scandal, which happened very recently. Ceylon Bank started in 1988. It is a systematically important bank in Sri Lankan economy. It invested funds and it lent to the borrowers, it accepted the funds of the depositors, and the main shareholder of the Ceylon Bank is the Selinco Consolidated Group. What happened in this particular crisis, this particular scandal, is that the funds of the Ceylon Bank was used by the majority shareholder of this bank, the Selinco Group, to save the Golden Key Company, which is a highly problematic company, which is a highly criticized company in the finance in Sri Lanka. Since these deposits are used for this unnecessary thing, unallowed thing, the depositors became fear about their funds, that they will lose their funds, so they rushed to the bank asking for their depositors back. When there's a long line outside the Ceylon Bank feared and they had no enough funds to satisfy the requirements of the depositors. In that point, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka intervened and it was taken under the supervision of the Bank of Ceylon. Those are the two banking scandals in Sri Lanka. Now I explain the underlying causes that I recognize from my research which causes these banking scandals. The first one is the dominating shareholders. The shareholder regime that exists in Sri Lanka, I think you all know, is the majority shareholder regime. There's this one majority shareholder and this minority shareholder, and there's very big issues with regard to the balancing of the interest of the majority shareholder on one hand and the minority shareholder of the other hand. We have enough laws, but what happened actually is the majority shareholders does not comply with the duties imposed upon them by the laws that is prevalent in Sri Lanka. That is what happened in the two banking scandals. The second one is bank governance. When we consider about the bank governance is highly connected with the political influences, political relationships. Yes, we have the laws, but we have to question whether they are implemented well. We have the laws, but the people who are doing the wrongs, they are under the cloak of the political favors, political supports, therefore they cannot be affected. Once you have worn this cloak named politics, no one can affect you, particularly in the context of Sri Lanka. The third one is auditing. The Accounting and Auditing Standards Act requires that the company shall have an independent auditor who shall provide auditing reports to the shareholders, stakeholders, and to the every person who is interested in that particular company or the corporate entity. But what happened in these two banking scandals, the auditing was a friendly matter. The auditor was a friend of the majority shareholders, the director board, therefore he did not perform the auditing as requested by the laws. So this auditing, though we have the laws, is a friendly matter between the majority shareholders, directors, and the person who is supposed to be an independent auditor. Moving on to the recommendations, I recommend that we have, as I said, we have the laws, but we must improve these laws, change these laws to go in line with the social, political and economic realities of the country. Further, I recommend that we shall have a corporate governance monitoring board to monitor the corporate governance of banks, consisting of the people who have the experience and expertise in the corporate governance of banks in the banking industry, and the board shall be free from political appointments. Thirdly, the awareness among the stakeholders of the banks, including the depositors, borrowers, shareholders, customers and the employees, shall be increased so they will play a more active role in the monitoring the corporate governance of banks. In conclusion, this study reveals that Sri Lanka has a satisfactory system of corporate governance of banks which is in line with the international standards. However, this legal structure does not coexist with the traditional socio-political setting in Sri Lanka. Implementation of such laws in this social-political context makes a certain group of people immune to these laws. The recent banking scandals in Sri Lanka can be attributed to the failures in the implementation of the corporate governance laws. Therefore, the corporate governance structure relating to banks shall be reformed to go in line with the traditional socio-political setting in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edirisinghe. I think if you look at it, the two banking scandals, if I go back my memory path, there were instances where the banks, for their own survival, when these rumors go and when the bank people start having what we call run on the bank, there were instances where the bank had to use various other methods, not only running to the central bank for cash, but other methodology to get the confidence of the public. I know in one instance, the bank's own money was redeposited in front of the public in order to show the public's confidence that the people are bringing in money to the bank. Because the rumors have been spread that the bank manager has run away with the money. So therefore, to get that confidence that the manager has not run away with the money, but people are still bringing in money, their own money, the bank used their own money to be redeposited in the eyes of the public. So these are the methods that they use it. The banks at the moment have a very comprehensive monitoring system by the central bank. But whatever said and done, the monitoring can be done only on the reports that are submitted by the banks. If the report that you submit is dishonest, how good the regulatory system you have it, you will never be able to monitor it. That is why the speaker rightfully said, at the moment we have a very comprehensive legal system, especially with regard to shareholding of the bank. We have so many restrictions. Nobody can hold more than 10% of the bank. But we know there are people who control banks. Right? There are business houses which control banks. So therefore it is, as she rightfully said, we have a very good corporate governance structure, but whether it is being implemented in that same spirit and same transparent manner is a question to be asked. And I hope that you will continue to do more research into this area and enlighten the public as to where they are